following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Golenbock University, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the host himself, Peter Golenbock. How are you, sir?
Good evening. I am fine. Thank you. I wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
And a Happy Rockefeller while we're at it.
Okay. Kwanzaa?
Okay. And Kwanzaa and everything. Everybody should be happy and have a good holiday season. Jack Degraw is here. Jack Degraw does the Yankee Show on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. He is, as in Peter Golenbock's neck of the woods in St. Pete, or up close to it. And we're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys and the book you wrote on the Dallas Cowboys. How are you doing, Jack?
Great. How are you guys doing tonight?
Good voice. You have the pipes. I'll tell you that, Jack. I mentioned that. I don't know if you've been told that before, but you've got that old New York WOR radio voice. Speaking of WOR, Mr. Golenbock, you were there. You had a year and a year plus.
I had a year at WOR. And you know who was on my show a lot? Charlie Steiner. Charlie Steiner did the sports for WOR at the time, and he was such a terrific person and so knowledgeable and so smart. I very often tried to get him on, come for 5 to 10 minutes to talk about the current sports scene, and he was just marvelous.
Nice. Any stories you want to relay that we haven't talked about your WOR days? Anything that comes to mind?
I just had such marvelous guests. I mean, WOR was probably the most listened to AM radio talk station at the time. And so if I wanted a guest, they would come. And I had all sorts of, whoever was big at the time, whoever wrote a book at the time. I had Mel Allen on for an hour, and it was just just marvelous. Marshall, the relief pitcher for the Minnesota Twins, he was, I guess, with the Mets at the time and was trying to hang on, and even he came on my show for an hour to talk.
He must have been he does kinescopic stuff.
Yeah, Mike Marshall. He lives in our neck of the woods too, and he does a lot of coaching, teaching young kids how to pitch. Very unorthodox the way he has his kids pitch. He doesn't like the overhand motion. He prefers some other motion. And even though he is convinced that his is the right way and everybody else is wrong, he's still something of an outlier. Let's see. I had Frank DeFord, John Underwood. I mean, just anybody who was anybody at the time.
He holds. Let's get back to Marshall for a second. He holds some sort of innings pitched records or games.
Right. Yes.
What
he
did.
Was it, when he was pitching for
games,
Minnesota, he pitched in something like 90 games. He was indestructible because of the motion that he used did not hurt his arm. So they basically decided, he went to the manager and said, hey, I'm available every game. And they pitched him about, 90-something games.
Right. This guy would make an incredible coach, especially in this day and age of injury.
Well, nobody wants him. Nobody wants him because it's so extreme as to what he teaches the kids. And that's why if you want to take lessons from Mike Marshall, you go over to his house. He's got a batting cage attached to his house, and you learn how to pitch from him there. But you would think that all the colleges would love to have him, but they look at what he wants to teach the kids, and they don't like it.
Yeah. Well, if it's going to reduce injuries, one would think.
You would think. You would think is right.
And if I'm not mistaken, he's a PhD in what he does.
Oh, I'm absolutely certain that he is. You know, I was with him last year at a gathering of the Sabre, at a Sabre meeting, and it was interesting because he seemed like he was about 5'6". He was a little short guy who's balding. I just was taken aback by the fact that he was not very, very tall. Which, of course, in this day and age, if you're not, 6'5", you don't even get to pitch.
Right. Think of all the pitchers that never would have even been scouted. The Bobby Shantzes.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. Bobby Shantz, Whitey Ford. Yeah.
Yeah.
All those people. That's exactly right.
Hey, Jack Degraw, talk to Mr. Golenbock about anything Dallas, anything comes to mind. He's the maven. Well, wait, Jack, if you don't mind, let me ask you how, Peter, it came to be that you wrote a book on the Dallas Texans, and then I'll turn you over to Jack.
Dallas Cowboys, not the Dallas Texans.
Dallas Cowboys, sorry.
Yeah.
When you're a writer,
you look for things to write about, and at the time that I wrote this book, which was, I think, 1997, I had written Dynasty, the Bronx Zoo, Number One, Balls, Personal Fouls, American Zoom, and then Wrigleyville. And I enjoyed so much going to Chicago and interviewing all of those Chicago Cub players. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to take a football team and do the same thing? And so what's interesting is because with baseball teams, I've been incredibly fortunate during my career. When I started with Dynasty, Marty Appel, who was the assistant PR fellow behind Bob Fischel with the Yankees, I had gone to him and asked him, I said, if I can get a contract to write a book on the Yankees, will you allow me to come to Yankee Stadium and do research at the stadium? And most teams, when I went to the Mets, they said absolutely not. I never even approached the Red Sox. I didn't approach the Cubs. But when I called down to the Dallas Cowboys, the PR fella from the Dallas Cowboys, his name was Richard Dalrymple. He said, "Oh, by all means, we would love to have you come down, and we will help you any way we can." And I'll tell you, as a writer, it's so much easier to write a book on a team when you've got that kind of assistance. They gave me the telephone numbers and addresses of every one of their former players. They opened up their library to me, which was extensive. It was a marvelous, terrific experience working on this book on the Cowboys. Plus, I got to meet some of the most marvelous, terrific people, starting with Eddie LeBaron, Roger Staubach, of course. There were just so many. Leroy Jordan was really fantastic. Frank Clark, I interviewed for 7 hours. People like Buddy Dial. I became very close with Pete Gent, who was one of the great, marvelous characters of all time.
Wrote a book in his own right, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, he wrote North Dallas 40, and his stories in this book are just really, really marvelous. Bob Lilly, who was their star for years and years, was very, very helpful. Drew Pearson, Don Perkins, Staubach. Dwayne Thomas had some very, very interesting things to say. John Wilbur, Jerry Tubbs, Tex Schramm, the general manager, and of course, Tom Landry, who was very, very interesting and very, very kind and wonderful. So these were the people. These were the people I got to interview, and it was just. I'm reading this thing now for the first time in 20 years, and I'm saying to myself, how in the world did you ever do this? It's just...
Oh, all your books are so comprehensive and so well done, Peter. You don't cheat the public. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm curious.
We rarely do this. Your books are available on Amazon. Am I correct?
As far as I know.
Okay. What if somebody wanted an autographed copy from Peter Golenbock?
Send it to my house. You got to send it to me.
All right.
Email me at petergolan@AOL, and I'll write you back and send you my address, and be happy to.
I'll bet there are a bunch of folks that would want something like that.
Yeah, I get letters periodically. It's really quite wonderful, actually. There are whole rafts of Yankee fans and smaller rafts of Cubs and Red Sox and Mets fans. The ultimate Yankee fan. I'm the ultimate Met fan, and we've talked over the years about Forever Boys and how that affected me in so many different ways. Well, that's really wonderful because it certainly affected my life.
Yeah. I sat in the library day after day reading that book.
That's what a writer wants to hear. You got the book out of the damn library. Great.
I since bought a copy, believe me.
Okay.
I have a bunch of them. But that's you wouldn't want to hear that. But when I was a kid, the New York Public Library with the lions out in front.
Absolutely.
Learning the Dewey Decimal system and going, and my grandfather would say, published. A book, you're in the Dewey Decimal. It was like an immortality in our family.
Yeah.
And it was not in a day of you could get a book published, you just publish it yourself or whatever. It was something to be a published author. Can't tell you how, as a kid, growing up with that kind of mindset, getting to know you and other people, other authors on this network, but especially you, of course, because you started this whole thing. Can't tell you what that means to me on a daily basis.
Well, that's wonderful. That's very sweet.
Yeah, nice.
Very nice.
So now that I've cheered up, which I get to do every day, remember what one of your adversaries once said, got to laugh and cry every day. His sneaker deal notwithstanding, I took that to heart in life. It's important to get in touch with one's emotions, and this is a great way of doing it. Let's put it that way. So,
terrific.
Thank you for everything, Peter. It's been another great year, and
certainly has. I'm
going to turn you over to Jack Degraw. What would you be asking Peter Golenbock if he were listening? And he is.
Peter, I'd like you to, if you could be so kind, to share some stories about Don Meredith, what he went through in Dallas, the good and the bad.
Well, he is, the interesting thing about Don Meredith is that he does not have he did not ever have a telephone number. The only way you could reach him was by fax. He lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico. His second wife, she had been married to an actor. And when he married her, they left Los Angeles and they went to Santa Fe, where he basically lived the life of a recluse. And the disappointment, because Pete Gent, who I became very close to through doing this book, Gent and Meredith, of course, were very, very close. You know the book North Dallas 40, and that's Meredith and Gent. Those are the two who were the stars of that movie. And Pete told me, tremendous amount of inside scoop on Meredith and the difficulty that Meredith had between Tom Landry and some of the Southern players and him, because Meredith and Gent liked to smoke marijuana. This was the late 60s. This was, something that just about everybody did. But the Southerners, they took amyl nitrates and they took amphetamines, and they felt that somehow that marijuana was wrong. And, Gent was telling me, and actually Leroy told me the same thing. Leroy said he thought that his job was to try to force Pete Gent off the team. So in other words, they would have practice, and Leroy would just pound Gent into the ground because he wanted him to quit because he smoked marijuana with Meredith, which is really something. Wow. But Gent and Meredith, Gent would tell me that Meredith could have been, a far greater player had he had a coach who was, more in sync with him and less hostile to him.
Was Tom Landry not a supporter of marijuana per se?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. And in fact, they had another player by the name of Dwayne Thomas, who I got to interview. I mean, it was fascinating interviewing these people because the stuff that went on off the football field was, sometimes even more interesting than what was going on the football field. Dwayne Thomas was somebody who was involved also with marijuana, and what they did to him, one season ended and he got in his car to drive back to Southern California, and the Cowboy front office planted drugs in his car and then called the cops and had him arrested for it.
Oh, God. I remember reading that.
We must remember the setting was Texas.
Right. Don't forget it was Texas. Don't forget it was 1968, 69, 70.
Right.
Don't forget that Dwayne Thomas was black. And, the racism, I can't say that it's terribly better right now, but the racism existed down there, and the Cowboys wanted Dwayne to, stop using marijuana. They had
the misconceptions of marijuana run rampant too.
I mean, it's absurd. I mean, the number of people who die from drunk drivers is in the hundreds of thousands. The number of people who die from driving after you take marijuana is in the zeros. You're generally driving 8 miles down the highway. You're not killing anybody. But be that as it
there
may,
is no bigger cannabis advocate than I am in the world. Let me just tell you, though, that for driving, folks are best to stay away from it.
Well, of course.
Yeah,
well, of course.
Yeah.
But the hatred for people on that Cowboys team who were taking marijuana was palpable. That's what I found so interesting. That Leroy Jordan would go to such lengths to try to, in a way, injure Gent. They didn't do that to Meredith, but they figured that Gent was the bad, influence on Meredith, and so they tried to run Meredith out of town. Run Gent out of town. They didn't do it. They didn't do it because Gent loved to play football. Gent was interesting. He was interesting because he had never played football before being drafted to the Cowboys. Gent was a basketball player, and I find that just amazing that somebody could go from being just a basketball player to go and play in the NFL. I thought that was just amazing.
There's a kid from Cal named Gonzalez who was a tight end for a while. He had very little football experience, but he was strong. He was a strong forward in college, and those skills transcend. If you're a good basketball player, you're a good athlete.
Yeah, but you got to be tough as nails too.
Right.
Oh,
to be,
and
Gonzalez was. He was one of those. Did you get to talk to Landry about his assistant coaching days with the Giants?
Sure, I did. Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And then I will, in Taka, turn you over to Jack Degraw. Tell me about.
No, it's very interesting. This is great.
All right. I'm sorry, Jack, but I gotta hear this.
Well,
those
you
were
know,
the Jim Lee Howell days.
Yeah.
Jim Lee Howell days.
Yeah.
And
Jim Lee Howell was the coach of the New York Giants during the early and mid 50s, and his two assistant coaches who he had Vince Lombardi on offense, and he had Tom Landry on defense. If you can imagine that, and why the Maras didn't keep one of those two guys for themselves is the question that I've always wondered about. How could they have been, so wrong in their choices?
They end up with Alex Webster as their coach.
Yes, they did. And I knew Alex.
Not taking anything away from Alex Webster.
Right.
But he was Alex Webster. These guys were who they were.
Two of the greatest coaches in the history of NFL history. I know it.
Right.
I know it. So Vince Lombardi went to Green Bay, where he took a team that had very, very few victories and turned it into NFL champions in the late 60s. And, of course, Landry was named the first coach of the expansion Dallas Cowboys. And I think the season was either 60 or 61. It was somewhere in there where the team started. And he put together this juggernaut. And they became, another premier team in the NFL. He had something called the flex defense. I mean, it was sheer genius. And I remember interviewing Bob Lilly about it, and he was explaining it to me. And even after he explained it to me, I didn't even know what the hell he was talking about. But it had to do with setting up based on where the other teams set up. And it took 3 or 4 years, at least that's what the players told me, before they really understood what it was they were doing. And, of course, once they understood, their defense became, spectacular. Somewhere along the line, the league figured out what they were doing, and then they were able to counter that. And then the flex defense went away. But for those years in Dallas, when Landry had his flex defense going, with Bob Lilly anchoring that line, they were just spectacular. And Leroy Jordan was the middle linebacker, and he was, tough as nails and sensational as well. They were just terrific.
Let's not forget that Landry was a defensive end with those great Giant teams, and the guy he played with was Emlyn Tunnell, who was probably as good as any defensive halfback of the day.
Landry had an amazing history. He had gone to Texas, and I think he was there with Bobby Lane. I'm pretty sure he was there with Bobby Lane. And then he went and he became, I think, a flyer during the war, something like that, or maybe Korea. He was one tough character.
He was that square-jawed guy that to look at, right? He was the Sammy Baugh kind of features.
Sure. That's absolutely right. Another Texan. Sammy Baugh was another Texan. Sammy Baugh, by the way, was the very first coach for the Boston Patriots. When I was about 13 years old at Camp Winookie, we went to the Boston Patriots first. They were working out during the summer and getting ready for the season, and we went. And Sammy
Pirelli was the quarterback, right? Gino
Babe
Pirelli.
Yeah, Babe Pirelli, of course.
Babe
Of course he was the quarterback. But what was so interesting was to stand there and watch Sammy Baugh standing with his end, the fellow who caught him, and I wish I could remember his name, Mackle something or other. The two of them were standing 70 yards apart playing catch.
Whoa.
And I'm 13 years old, and I'm going, I couldn't throw the ball 10 yards, and they're standing 70 yards apart playing catch. I thought to myself, this guy must have had some career. And of course he did. He was one of the greatest players who ever played the game.
I'll give you an analogy. Chuck Bednarik would come up to Kittatinny camp a couple of times this summer, and just, give clinics, chat with the kids, sign autographs, that sort of thing. And he could hike the ball under his legs, hike the ball with a perfect spiral further than anybody in the camp could throw the ball.
Of course. Oh, let me read you a couple of paragraphs from this. This is Pete Gent talking. He says, in 66, I had a great exhibition season, and Meredith and I had really good rapport. We were running together. He'd been married and divorced and married again, and I'm married, and now we're two married guys. He married a woman named Cheryl King. Her father was a big trucking executive in Fort Worth. He married her in the off-season after 65. Yes, he did, because I got married in June of 66, just before camp, and after I'd been in camp for a while, he had met my wife before we got married, although she was at Michigan State and only came down and visited. He sidled up to me, trying to hem and haw around, wanting to know whether I ran around on my wife. I said, well, not really, but I liked him so much. I loved running around with him, so we went out every night. Dick Nolan was in charge of curfew, so we were in L.A. every night. Of course, we'd get drunk, and Meredith would come back and complain that his arm hurt and miss morning practice, and I'd be out there having to run around dying. But to me, it was a classic example of Meredith knowing what worked, particularly dealing with Landry. You had to stay loose or you just went crazy. So I had a really good exhibition season, then opened the season against New York and just blew them away. I didn't catch the ball, but otherwise I did my job. I blocked. I was an excellent blocker for a flanker, and in those days you could crack back, so I blocked the linebackers alike. That's why Dan Reeves had such good running stats, because they always ran to the strong side, and I cracked back on whoever showed up first, a linebacker, whoever, and you'd get such a huge pile-up. Lots of times it would knock down 2 or 3 guys. Anyway, in the Minnesota game, we started out slow. Everybody was having trouble. Minnesota got up on us by a touchdown. He pulled me at the half, put Buddy Dial in, and Dial caught a 5 yards down and in for a touchdown. I lost my job. It goes on like that. Anyhow, he was just so fabulous. He was just so great to hear him talk about Dandy Don Meredith and how the two of them went down to Baja California and were riding around on motorcycles doing 120 miles an hour in the desert, and how Landry turned the thing over and almost killed himself. Not Landry, Meredith, turned the bike over, almost killed himself. These guys were amazing. They just were.
Yeah. Different mentalities in baseball.
Understand something else too. Let's assume they were making $42,000 a year in 1968. It's not like the quarterbacks today who are making $20 million a year. I imagine if you're making $20 million a year, you're probably not getting on your motorcycle and riding through the Mexican desert at 120 miles an hour.
Yeah, and they weren't making 40. They were making more like 15, and unless you were a quarterback or running.
Well, Meredith was a star, so he was making more than that.
Yeah, but it wasn't guaranteed. The money,
No, not guaranteed now.
Right, right. That's incredible.
I know.
They could meet on a hoof.
Yep.
40 years later, things haven't changed.
Yeah.
Jack, take over my voice. I can't talk anymore.
No, it's great stuff. I just want to ask Peter, about Bob Hayes, because I remember when they used to play the Giants, and Bob Hayes used to go against Henry Carr, two of the fastest human beings in the world. And, guys.
Those were such great games. Such great games. There were three fabulous ends on the Cowboys at the time. Bob Hayes was one of them. I'm trying to think who the other. Frank Clark was the second one, and I think Gent was the third one at the time. And when I interviewed them, all three of them were living with their mothers.
Okay.
Football really can take a lot out of you. You play 10, 15 years, and you really get your head scrambled. And, it really can mess up your life, as we have come to find out with CTE. Hayes turned out to be one of the greatest players ever to play for the Cowboys. He had been an Olympic champion. He had run so fast, he had not really been a football player. And he was another one of these guys that Tex Stram decided to take a chance on, Gent being the other one. And there was, I think, a third one, too. One of the other defensive backs who had a brother. I'll find his name later. But they took this chance on Hayes, and it turned out that Hayes was one of the greatest receivers in the history of Cowboy history. He was so fast that it was incredibly difficult for defensive backs to stay up with him, and he caught a tremendous number of long touchdown passes from Meredith.
Okay. Got to take another one. The 49er rivalry with Dallas. Did you get into that at all?
Oh, sure.
Anything stand out from those years?
Yeah, well, the catch at the end where the 49ers.
White Clark.
Yeah, he died.
Rest in peace. He passed away
died this year.
A few months ago.
I know, terrible. Yeah, no, he broke the heart of every Dallas fan with that catch of his. It was an amazing catch. He was in the corner of the end zone, and he twisted around, reached up, caught the ball, and beat them.
And I don't think the quarterback, whose name slips my mind, for the Giants, for the Niners, saw it. He was flat on his ass.
Oh, he was. He was flat on his back. No, that's absolutely right. Yeah. No. Henderson was another really, fascinating character for the Cowboys.
With some demons and troubles, linebacker.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, Thomas Henderson. And he,
again,
very, very open. The fact that the Cowboys had given me permission to do this, where I could say to the players, I'm doing this with the approval of the organization. I suspect it had a great deal to do with how open and wonderful these players were when I interviewed them. Henderson had at that point, this was now the 70s, where the marijuana problem had become a cocaine problem, and this had become his problem. And he talked about it. He was fascinating, and again, he's another African American player, and they're not always treated as well, and they feel it. They can tell.
There was another big guard that later on gets caught with a bale of marijuana going across country.
Oh, there certainly was. He and I were going to do a book together. That's quite a few years later.
Right.
Nate Newton.
Nate,
yeah.
Yes.
My boy Nate. Nate actually, while we were doing the proposal for that book, decided one day to get in his truck and drive from Dallas to, I think at the time, I was here. He drove here. He drove to St. Petersburg to come and see me, just for the hell of it.
Whoa.
I know. It was fabulous.
He was a good old country boy.
I love the guy. He was just fabulous. But he had done that. He after football, he decided he would make a career out of selling marijuana, and he filled a semi in Arizona with marijuana and drove it to Florida.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
I don't
a lot. Oh, yeah. As he said, he wasn't going to do anything halfway. So
I remember reading it and going, "Whoa,
whoa, yes, whoa, yeah."
All right, Jack. Anything you'd like to say in closing? Because I'm respectful of Wendy.
Yes. Wendy, thank you.
Well, I just like to, I'm glad Peter finally got a chance to talk about his Cowboys book, because I don't think I've ever heard him speak too much of it. So I'm just glad.
Nobody much asked me about it.
Well, then I did some good producing, and I'm proud of that.
You did a very nice job. Yes. Yes.
Right.
I've always had a soft spot. Always had a soft spot for the Cowboys because of the wonderful way that they treated me. And when the book came out, I did a book tour down in Texas. And it was just, I was in Austin. I was with who's the singer with the Texas Jew Boys? What was his name? Wonderful singer. He and I did a show together. At any rate, it was a lot of fun.
I know who you mean. Kinky something.
Kinky Friedman. Yes. Kinky Friedman.
Right.
He and I did a show together, and it was wonderful. And I got to go to in Austin. I got to go to the JFK library, not the JFK, the LBJ library, which was a treat.
Hey, how many people at this moment are going, well, back then I got to spend time with Peter Golenbock.
No, stop.
And that sort of stuff. Believe me, just as many people are going, I spent time with Golenbock than you with them. That's just my take.
No, you're too kind. You're too kind.
Three kind, as a matter of fact.
Yes, three kind. I wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful New Year, and we'll talk to you in 2019.
Absolutely. The goal is to all three of us stay healthy.
Absolutely.
All day today.
Without a doubt.
Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. The show is Golenbock University. The guest was Jack Degraw. The host is Peter Golenbock. I'm Ralph Tycho, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, the weak link of it all. Adios. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.